She slid the envelope across the table without looking up. The room was already filling with applause somewhere down the hallway. And Nolan Prescott stood there, holding a manila envelope that weighed nothing and somehow contained everything. His name was being called. The words echoed from the ballroom just 30 feet away. And the 2023 Industry Leadership Award goes to Nolan Prescott. He looked at the envelope. He looked at his wife. Vivian Aldrich Prescott didn't flinch. She had always been precise. In her words, in her timing, in her cruelty. Nolan had spent 11 years learning the difference between the three. He picked up the envelope. He straightened his jacket. And he walked through those double doors and onto that stage. The Scottsdale Convention Center was packed that Thursday evening. 400 people from the Southwest's most influential real estate and investment corridors. Architects, developers, fund managers, city council members, all dressed like success was a dress code. Nolan had built his firm, Prescott Capital Advisors, from a one-room office in Tempe 12 years ago. He had started with 2 clients and a second-hand desk. Tonight, he had a $280 million portfolio and a room full of people standing to applaud him. But the applause sounded distant, like it was reaching him through water. He climbed the steps to the stage. He shook the hand of the awards committee chair, a man named Garrett Holloway. He accepted the crystal plaque. He stood at the podium, and somewhere inside his jacket pocket, the divorce papers waited. He had known something was wrong for months. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. No screaming, no discovered messages, no confrontation. It had been quieter than that. Slower. Vivian had stopped asking about his days. She had stopped sitting with him at dinner. She had started booking solo weekends to Sedona, calling them personal retreats. She had stopped laughing at the things that used to make her laugh. Nolan had told himself it was stress. She was a senior partner at a prestigious architecture firm. The pressure was real. The hours were brutal. He had given her space, the way he thought a good partner should. But space, he was learning, had 2 uses. It could give a person room to breathe, or it could give them room to leave. He cleared his throat at the podium. He looked out at 400 faces. He thought about the envelope. He thought about what it meant to have built something this large and still feel this alone. I started this company because I believe that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, he said. It's what you build that outlasts you. The room responded warmly. He paused at the right moment. He said the right things. He smiled at the right beats. 11 years in high-stakes finance had taught him how to perform composure. What it hadn't prepared him for was performing it with a divorce filing pressing against his ribs. After the speech, he stepped into the corridor. He found a quiet alcove near the coat check. He opened the envelope. Vivian had not used their shared attorney. She had retained someone new, a firm called Blackwood and Mercer, known in Scottsdale legal circles for one thing: high-asset dissolution. Aggressive, thorough, and expensive. Nolan read the first page slowly, then the second, then the third. The filings cited irreconcilable differences. It listed the marital assets with forensic precision. It requested an equal division of Prescott Capital Advisors, his company, on the grounds that she had contributed to its growth during the marriage. He turned to the signature page. There was a line with his name typed beneath it. There was a pen clipped to the back of the last page. Vivian had thought of everything. Now, right here, I want to ask you something, because this moment is one that a lot of people would handle very differently. Nolan Prescott is standing alone in a corridor, having just accepted the biggest professional honor of his career, holding papers that could cost him half of everything he built. What would you do in that moment? Would you walk back in and confront her? Would you put the papers away and pretend the night was normal? Or would you sign them right then, right there, and let the decision land on its own weight? Drop your answer in the comments before you keep watching, because what Nolan did next says everything about who he was and who he was about to become. He signed every page, slowly and deliberately, the way he signed contracts worth 8 figures. Not frantically, not emotionally, with the calm a man who had already made a decision his heart had not yet caught up to. He clipped the pen back. He slid the papers into the envelope. He sealed it. Then he walked back into the ballroom, found Vivian at their table, and set the envelope down in front of her. He leaned in close enough that no one nearby could hear. And he said one sentence. Just one. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He said it the way you say something to a person you once loved completely and now have to love from a distance. Then he straightened up, greeted the couple at the next table by name, and spent the next 2 hours working the room like a man who had nothing to fear. Vivian Aldrich Prescott had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her father, Douglas Aldrich, had been a structural engineer who built bridges for a living and expected the same precision from everything else in his life. Her mother had been a gallery curator, elegant, composed, allergic to disorder. Vivian had inherited both qualities. She was brilliant. She was beautiful in a way that takes effort and makes it look effortless. She had an eye for design that clients paid enormous fees to access. She had also grown up watching her parents perform a marriage rather than live one. Two people in the same house, in the same bed, who had slowly become strangers who shared a last name. Vivian had promised herself she would never do that. The problem was, she had done exactly that. And somewhere between year 7 and year 9 of her marriage to Nolan, she had stopped trying to stop it. She had met someone, not in the explosive way of dramatic affairs. It had started as professional admiration. A developer named Reed Calloway who had hired her firm for a luxury mixed-use project in downtown Phoenix. Reed was 10 years older than Nolan. He was quieter, more philosophical. He asked her questions about her work that Nolan had stopped asking years ago. She told herself it was just conversation. Then it was just coffee. Then it was something she had no clean word for. She had not told Nolan about Reed. She would not tell anyone about Reed for a long time, because what she felt for Reed was real, and real things, in her experience, had a way of being destroyed the moment other people could see them. The morning after the awards ceremony, Nolan called his attorney, a man named Carter Whitfield, who had handled Prescott Capital's legal affairs for 7 years. Carter was methodical, patient, and sharp in the way that only becomes visible when things get contested. She retained Blackwood and Mercer, Nolan said. I know, Carter said, which means she's been planning this for a while. It means she hired the right firm for what she wants, which is half the company, which is what she's entitled to argue for, Carter said. But entitled to argue for and entitled to receive are two very different things. Nolan exhaled. What I need to do? First, Carter said, tell me what you said to her last night. That matters. Everything you say to her from now until this is resolved matters. Nolan was quiet for a moment. I told her that I hoped she found what she was looking for. That's it. That's it. Carter paused. That's actually a very good sentence, he said. The next 6 weeks were quiet in the way that financial and legal warfare is always quiet, on the surface. Below the surface, documents were being gathered, valuations were being requested, depositions were being scheduled. Vivian's legal team argued that she had been an active contributor to Prescott Capital's brand, client network, and social capital during the marriage. That her connections in the architecture and development world had directly generated referrals worth millions. Carter's response was methodical. He produced 7 years of company records. He documented every client acquisition, every deal origin, every referral chain. He demonstrated, clearly and without drama, that Vivian's professional contributions to the company's growth, while real, were social and indirect, not operational or financial. He did not attack her. He did not minimize her. He simply told the story of Prescott Capital with numbers and documents that had no emotion in them at all. Reed Calloway came into the picture publicly about 6 weeks after the filing. Vivian was photographed with him at a fundraiser for a children's hospital, a charity event that Scottsdale social class treated as an annual performance of generosity. No one published the photograph in any formal way, but it circulated. The way things circulate in communities where everyone knows everyone and information moves at the speed of a text message. Nolan saw it. He felt the particular sting of it. Not because he still wanted Vivian back, but because public humiliation carries its own unique weight, separate from heartbreak. He said nothing. He posted nothing. He called no one to complain. His assistant, a sharp young woman named Sloan Harrington, noticed that he came in early every day that week and stayed late. She left a coffee on his desk each morning without being asked. She did not comment on his personal life. She had worked for him long enough to understand that he processed things through work. There's a specific kind of grief that doesn't look like grief from the outside. It looks like productivity. It looks like discipline. It looks like a man who is doing fine. Nolan Prescott was doing fine and also completely not fine. He was restructuring 2 investment portfolios. He was onboarding a new institutional client. He was attending every professional engagement he had committed to. And in the spaces between all of it, he was quietly grieving a version of his life that no longer existed. Not just the marriage, the assumption he had carried since he was young, that if you built something real, something lasting, something worth admiring, the rest of life would follow in proportion. It hadn't. And that gap between what he had earned professionally and what he had lost personally was the thing that kept him awake at 2 a.m. in a house that now felt like a hotel he couldn't check out of. At the 10-week mark, Carter called with an update. Her team submitted a revised proposal, he said. They're willing to negotiate down from 50% of the company. To what? A lump sum settlement based on a valuation of your assets during the marriage, plus her portion of shared property. Which means they looked at our documentation and decided the company argument was not going to hold. Nolan sat with that for a moment. What's the number? Carter told him. It was not a small number, but it was a number Nolan could absorb without losing the company, without losing the 11 years of work that had become the architecture of his life. Does this feel right to you? Carter asked. No, Nolan said. It feels like what it is, which is the cost of having believed in something that wasn't there. Carter was quiet. I'll drop the counter, he said. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday morning. Nolan signed in Carter's conference room. Vivian signed at her attorney's office across town. They did not see each other. They communicated only through counsel. The house in Paradise Valley was listed 2 weeks later. It sold in 11 days. Scottsdale real estate moved fast that year. Vivian took an extended leave from her firm and relocated temporarily to her parents' home in Greenwich. Reed Calloway's Phoenix project quietly stalled following a financing dispute. The relationship that had started as admiration and coffee took its first real test: distance, pressure, and the absence of the romantic architecture that made it feel sustainable. Nolan heard about that later. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt something more neutral. The acknowledgement that other people's stories almost never end the way they look like they're going to end. 3 months after that awards night, almost to the day, Nolan was approached after a panel discussion at a development summit in Phoenix. The man who approached him was Garrett Holloway, the same man who had handed him the crystal plaque, the same man who had been seated 3 tables away when Vivian passed him the envelope. Garrett was not a man who spoke about personal things easily. He was 61 years old, deliberate, and had the manner of someone who measured words before spending them. He waited until the room had mostly cleared. I want to tell you something, Garrett said. I was watching you that night. Nolan waited. I've been in this industry for 35 years, Garrett said. I have seen men receive awards and fall apart at the podium because of things smaller than what you were carrying that night. You didn't fall apart. I just did what needed to be done, Nolan said. No, Garrett said. You did something harder than that. You let it land and kept moving. That sentence you said to her, I couldn't hear it, but I watched her face when you said it. And whatever it was right. Nolan looked at him for a moment. I told her I hoped she found what she was looking for, he said. Same thing I told you I said. That's all it was. Garrett nodded slowly. 3 months ago, I would have thought that was just something people say to end a conversation gracefully. Now I think it might be the most honest thing one person can say to another. He extended his hand. I have a project I want to discuss with you, Garrett said. If you're open to it. A fund I'm organizing. Institutional, long horizon, Southwest focused. I've been watching your work for 2 years. That night told me what I needed to know about your character. Nolan shook his hand. Not because of the opportunity, not because of the money, but because sometimes the world offers you a small confirmation that doing things with dignity, when dignity costs you something, eventually registers with the people who are paying attention. It would not fix what had broken. It would not return the years or the version of his life he had imagined. It would not make the 2 a.m. silence in the house any less loud. But Prescott Capital entered its next chapter with a new institutional partner. And Nolan Prescott entered his next chapter with something quieter and more durable than applause. He entered it knowing exactly who he was when the pressure was highest and the audience was watching. And knowing that, he was beginning to understand, was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the only thing that truly belonged to him. And now, one more question before we wrap. Garrett Holloway watched a stranger carry something heavy with dignity and decided, 3 months later, that it meant something about his character. Do you think that's how trust actually gets built? Not through what people say about themselves, but through what you observe when they think the moment doesn't count. Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what you think. My personal reflection. What this story really shows is how pressure reveals people. Not in the big declared moments, but in the small, unrehearsed ones. Nolan didn't give a speech about integrity. He just signed the papers quietly, said one honest sentence, and went back into the room. That's harder than it sounds. Most of us, when we're hurt, want the moment to be witnessed. We want the other person to see the damage they caused. Nolan resisted that. Not because he didn't feel it, but because he understood something instinctively. How you behave when you're wounded is the truest version of who you are. Vivian's choices are more complicated than they appear. She didn't leave because she was cruel. She left because she had been quietly disappearing inside a life that looked right from the outside. That's a recognizable human failure, not a moral one. The uncomfortable truth is that both people in this marriage stopped paying attention at some point. Nolan through work and assumption. Vivian through withdrawal, and eventually through someone else. What Garrett Holloway understood, after 3 months of thinking about it, is that character isn't announced. It's demonstrated in the moments where falling apart would have been completely understandable. Nolan's one sentence wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was simply true. And truth, offered without bitterness, is one of the rarest things one person can give another at the end of something that mattered.